The jungle at the edge of Verdant Station smelled like wet copper and something sweet that had no name in any human language. Reed Calloway had been walking through it for 3 hours. His boots were soaked. His scanner was dying. And somewhere above the thick canopy, a moon he never bothered to learn the name of was throwing pale green light across everything in a way that made the whole forest look like the inside of a dream. He was not a romantic man. He did not think it was beautiful. He thought it was wet and dark, and that his left knee hurt, and that he had 17 more grid squares to survey before he could go home and sleep. Reed worked for the Colonial Science Bureau, which was a long name for a job that mostly involved walking through places other people did not want to go, writing down what lived there, and sending the reports to people who rarely read them. He had been doing this for 9 years. He was good at it. He did not love it the way people in recruitment videos loved it. He simply did it, reliably, every shift, because reliability was the one thing he had always been certain of in himself. He pressed through a wall of broad-leafed ferns and nearly stepped on the eggs. There were 5 of them, sitting in a hollow at the base of a split tree. They were dark, almost black, with a faint iridescent shimmer that caught the moonlight strangely. Each one was roughly the size of a human head. 4 of them were shattered. Their shells collapsed inward, whatever had been inside them long gone. The 5th was cracked down one side. Not broken, just cracked. Reed crouched down. He reached for his scanner. It chose this exact moment to die completely. The screen went dark. Reed stared at it. He put it in his bag. He looked at the cracked egg. The crack widened while he watched. He did not move. He had spent enough time near enough strange creatures to know that sudden movement near a hatching animal was how people got hurt. So he went very still, in the way that 9 years of field work had trained him to, and he watched. The shell split. A small, wet, 6-limbed thing pulled itself out in stages, the way something might climb out of a collapsed tent, awkwardly, with great effort, piece by piece. It was the size of a large cat. Its scales were dark but caught light the same way the shell had, shifting color depending on the angle. Its wings were folded tight against its back, too small to be useful yet. Its head was disproportionately large, and its eyes were enormous, pale gold, with pupils that adjusted to the dark in a way Reed could actually see happening. It looked directly at him. It made a sound, low, soft, somewhere between a click and a hum. It was not aggressive. It was not a warning. Reed had spent years cataloging animal sounds, and he knew this one. It was a question. His radio crackled. "Reed, you get the Section 4 readings yet?" He reached up and clicked it off. He stayed crouched in the mud, looking at the hatchling, and the hatchling looked back at him with those gold eyes and asked its question again. He should have called it in. He knew that. There was a protocol for exactly this situation. It involved contacting the Colonial Bureau, which would contact the Hegemony Diplomatic Office, which would arrange collection of the hatchling through official channels. It was clean and correct, and would have taken approximately 4 days and produced a great deal of paperwork that Reed would have had to fill out. He told himself he would call it in at the station. It was too late to make the call now, with a dead scanner and a broken radio link. He would carry it back, keep it warm for the night, and report in the morning. He held out his hand, palm up, the way he had learned to hold his hand near creatures that were scared and small. The hatchling looked at his hand. Then it walked across the hollow, climbed up his arm with all 6 limbs, and settled on his shoulder. It was warm, warmer than he expected, and it was trembling, very slightly, in the way that small things trembled when they had just come into a world that was much larger and colder than the place they had been before. Reed stood up slowly. He walked the remaining 4 kilometers back to the station with a baby Draknari on his shoulder, and it did not make another sound the entire way, and neither did he. He called it Skrull. It was the closest word in Draknari, according to his translation program, for small, stubborn thing. He did not tell anyone he had named it. He did not call it in. He told himself he would do it in the morning. He sat at his desk and pulled up every file he could access on Draknari hatchling biology. There was almost nothing. The data was classified at a level his clearance did not touch. He found 3 papers, 2 of them more than a century old. One of them redacted so heavily it was mostly black bars with the occasional preposition visible. He read what he could. Skrull investigated his coffee mug, then his chair, then his boot, which it climbed inside and sat in for several minutes, apparently satisfied. It was nearly midnight when Skrull climbed back up to his chest, curled against his sternum, and exhaled. The exhale was warm. It was also something else. Reed felt it in his ribs first, then spreading, a slow, deep pulse, like a second heartbeat syncing with his own. His desk lamp flickered. Every device on his bench went dark. The monitoring tab on his colony health band, which tracked his heart rate and blood pressure continuously, flatlined for exactly 11 seconds. Then everything came back on. Reed sat very still. He looked down at Skrull. Skrull looked up at him. His heart rate was slower than it had been in years. Calm, even, like something had reached in and set it to a steadier frequency. He should have been frightened. He made a note that he probably should have been frightened. He opened the last file his clearance would allow. A 200-year-old legal document, Draknari in origin, translated by an automatic system that clearly had not been updated in some time. He scrolled to the final section. The translation was rough, but one line came through clearly enough. The bond is absolute. The bonded shall not be separated. The outsider shall not survive the reclamation. Reed read it twice. 7 of them. He looked down at Skrull, who had fallen asleep on his chest with one small grip wrapped around the collar of his jacket. Reed sat very still, in the middle of his small room, with a Draknari fleet overhead and a baby dragon asleep on him, and thought about how he had been planning to request a transfer to a quieter posting next month. He had a feeling the request was going to be delayed. The announcement came through the colony speakers at 4 in the morning, in the calm, carefully neutral voice that colonial governments used when they did not want people to panic, which was the voice that made everyone panic. This is Governor Aldrich with a routine advisory. We are currently in contact with hegemony vessels conducting a standard territorial passage. There is no cause for concern. Please remain in your residential areas until further notice. Routine. Standard. No cause for concern. Reed sat on the edge of his bed and counted the lights he could see through his window. There were 7 ships up there. He had looked up the Draknari fleet formation designations in the 20 minutes since the alert. 7 ships, in that particular configuration, was not a territorial passage. It was a retrieval posture. The hegemony used it when they wanted something back that they believed had been taken from them. Skrull was still asleep on his pillow. Reed made tea. It was something to do with his hands while his mind ran through everything at once. He was not panicking. He was doing what he always did when a situation was bad. He was listing the facts, in order, until the shape of the problem became clear. Fact: he had found a Draknari hatchling in a crash site the Bureau had logged as debris. Fact: the crash site was a royal transport. He had found this in the logs at 2 in the morning, before the fleet arrived. A royal transport, listed as a navigational accident 6 weeks ago. For confirmed dead. No mention of a clutch. No mention of surviving eggs. Fact: there were 7 warships in orbit, and they were not there for a territorial passage. Fact: the last legal document he had been able to access before his clearance was blocked had used the word reclamation. He drank his tea. Skrull woke up, made its small questioning sound, and investigated the mug. The knock on his door came at 5:30. 2 colonial security officers, both of them trying to look like this was a normal visit. Mr. Calloway, the governor would like to speak with you. He had been expecting this. He picked up Skrull, who gripped his jacket immediately and showed no interest in going anywhere, and followed them out. Governor Aldrich was a man shaped entirely by the anxiety of office. He had the look of someone who had been sweating since the ships appeared and had not stopped. He was standing in the Colonial Administrative Building's main room, surrounded by 3 advisors and a communications officer, and when Reed walked in with Skrull on his shoulder, Aldrich's face went through several expressions in fast succession. "You found it," Aldrich said. "Yes," Reed said. "When?" "Last night." Survey shift. Aldrich looked at Skrull. Skrull looked at Aldrich with its gold eyes. Aldrich looked back at Reed. "You need to give it back," Aldrich said. "Right now? Today? We call the fleet. We arrange a handover, and we explain that it was an honest mistake and that you found it in the wild and brought it in for safekeeping." "I need to show you something first," Reed said. He had the document on his tablet. He had printed it, too, because he was the kind of person who printed important things. He set both the tablet and the paper on Aldrich's desk and pointed to the relevant line. Aldrich read it. His advisors read it over his shoulder. The communications officer made a small sound. "That's 200 years old," Aldrich said. Yes, Reed said. I also have this. The second document was from Dr. Nessa Holt. She had come to the administrative building an hour before Reed arrived, and she had brought a biological analysis. She had run at 3 in the morning on the one Draknari paper that had not been properly classified. It was a paper on hatchling physiology published by a Draknari academic 140 years ago, before the hegemony had started classifying everything. The relevant section was highlighted. Aldrich read it. Reed looked at his watch. About 9 hours ago, he said. The room was very quiet. So if we hand it over now, one of Aldrich's advisors said slowly. It will die, Nessa said. She was a small woman who spoke like she was reading from a final report. No drama, no softening, just facts. Within 3 days of separation, the bond is complete. The biology is the biology. Aldrich sat down. The Draknari fleet, which had been silent since arrival, chose this moment to transmit. The message came through the colonial communications array and was broadcast automatically to every terminal in the building. A voice, deep, flat, carrying the specific texture of someone accustomed to being obeyed, spoke in heavily accented standard. This is Admiral Dorvin of the Draknari Hegemony 3rd Reclamation Fleet. We are aware that a hatchling of Hegemony bloodline is currently within your colony bounds. You will return the hatchling, unharmed, within 6 standard hours. Failure to comply will result in this colony being designated a threat to Hegemony bloodline security. We do not expect this to be a complicated conversation. The transmission ended. Reed counted 6 seconds of silence in the room before anyone spoke. 6 hours, Aldrich said. Yes, Reed said. And if we give it back? It dies, Nessa said again, with the same flat certainty. Aldrich put his face in his hands. Reed understood the feeling. He had been doing a version of this since midnight, when the fleet lights first appeared through his window, and his brain had started processing what this actually meant. Skrull made a soft sound against his neck. It had been doing that periodically, a low, warm vibration, like a very small engine running. Reed had noticed that every time it did this, his heart rate dropped slightly. He made a note to mention this to Nessa. The security team tried to move Skrull at 9 in the morning. The mug did not fall. The officer held it. The coffee drained out through the hole onto the floor. Skrull turned back around and resumed watching the wall. Nobody touched Skrull again. At 10 in the morning, with 4 hours left on the Draknari deadline, Nessa came to Reed's temporary holding room, a conference room with a cot, which was the colony's idea of protective custody, and sat down across from him. I found the transport records, she said. The ship that crashed 6 weeks ago wasn't just a royal transport. It was Dorvin's sister's ship. She was carrying a clutch. 3 other adults, all family, all dead. Skrull is the only survivor. Reed absorbed this. So Dorvin isn't just a fleet admiral running a retrieval mission, he said. Skrull is the last of his immediate bloodline, Nessa said. Yes. Reed looked at Skrull, who was currently sitting on the conference table and examining a pen with intense focus. He doesn't want a retrieval, Reed said. He wants Skrull alive. And Skrull being alive and Skrull being handed over are now incompatible things. Unless Dorvin doesn't know about the bonding biology, Nessa said, or knows and doesn't believe it. Or the communications terminal in the corner of the room activated. Not a broadcast this time. A direct channel, opened from the fleet and routed specifically to this room. The communications officer's voice came through, shaky. Mr. Calloway, the fleet is requesting a direct line. Not to the governor. Not to the bureau. To you. Specifically. Not yet, he said. Who else did they ask for? Nobody. Just you. He thought about this for a moment. Nessa looked at him sideways. He was buying time. 30 minutes was enough for one more search through every legal archive his clearance could reach. If there was something in Draknari law that covered this, any version of it, any angle, he needed to find it before he spoke to anyone with that fleet. Because the deadline was still running. 3 hours and 40 minutes, now. And Reed Calloway had spent 9 years learning that the difference between a solution and a disaster was usually just how much of the problem you understood before you opened your mouth. He opened his tablet. He started reading. Skrull put the pen down, crossed the table, and sat directly on top of the tablet. Reed moved it out from under the hatchling without looking up. Skrull climbed onto his arm and settled there, watching him read, its tail moving in slow arcs. The clock ran. The shuttle came down at midday. It was not a warship drop. It was a single diplomatic vessel, narrow and dark, descending through the cloud cover with the deliberate slowness of something that wanted to be seen but not feared. It landed on the colony's outer pad, the one they used for trade ships and survey deliveries, and sat there for several minutes before the door opened. One Draknari stepped out. She was tall, even by Draknari standards, with the longer facial ridges that indicated age and the darker scale coloration of the hegemony's inner court. She wore no armor. She carried a translator device in one hand and nothing in the other, which was the Draknari way of signaling that you had not come to fight. Governor Aldrich went out to meet her personally, with 4 security officers and a great deal of nervous energy. Reed watched from the window of his conference room. "Who was that?" Nessa asked from beside him. Reed had spent his 30 minutes well. "Counsel Yaira," he said. "She's one of the senior voices in the hegemony diplomatic branch. She was mentioned in 2 of the legal precedent cases I found. She argued against a reclamation action 40 years ago, the only case where the hegemony ever paused one. Did she win?" Nessa looked at him. "How do you know all of this?" "I read fast when I'm scared," Reed said. The negotiations began in the colony's main meeting hall. Yaira sat across from Aldrich and 3 of his advisors. Reed sat at the far end of the table, which was where Aldrich wanted him, present but clearly not in charge. Skrull sat on the table in front of Reed and regarded Yaira with the same total attention it gave everything. Yaira looked at Skrull for a long moment before she said anything at all. "It bonded," she said. It was not a question. "Yes," Reed said. Aldrich gave him a look that meant, "Let me handle this." Reed said nothing else. He had already decided that the best thing he could do in the next hour was listen more than he spoke and let the other people in the room show him what they actually wanted. Yaira explained the bonding law in full. Reed had found fragments of it. Hearing it in total was different. In 800 years of Draknari recorded history, a hatchling had bonded outside its bloodline exactly 3 times. All 3 cases had been handled through reclamation. The bonded parties eliminated, the hatchling retrieved. In all 3 cases, the bonded parties had been non-Draknari. In all 3 cases, they had died before they could fully understand what had happened to them. "The law exists because the bond was used against us," Yaira said. She was not angry when she said it. She was the opposite of angry. She was tired in the way of someone who had explained a very old problem many times and had never found a satisfying resolution. The first bonded outsider understood what they had. They held the hatchling's survival over the hegemony's head. It became a tool of control. "We passed the bonding law to ensure it could never happen again." "How long ago was that?" Reed asked. 812 years. "And the law hasn't changed since." "Laws that exist to prevent extinction-level threats do not change quickly," Yaira said. "I understand that," Reed said. He waited a moment. "Can I ask you something?" Yaira looked at him. Her gold eyes were much like Skrull's, he thought, only older and much more guarded. "In all 3 of those historical cases," Reed said, "did the bonded outsider know about the bond before the fleet arrived?" The silence in the room shifted. "No," Yaira said slowly. "They did not." Yaira was very still. "I'm not saying this to excuse anyone," Reed said. "I'm saying it because it matters for what we do right now. The 3 previous cases don't tell you what happens when the bonded party knows the biology, knows the law, and is trying to find a solution. There's no data for that. This is a new situation." Aldrich made a small, pained sound. He had stopped trying to control the conversation 15 minutes ago. Yaira looked at Reed for a long time. Then she looked at Skrull. Skrull was watching her with its head tilted slightly to one side. "The Admiral," she said at last, "is not going to accept that argument." "I know," Reed said. "He doesn't have to accept the argument. He just has to look at the biology." Reed slid Nessa's report across the table. "If we hand Skrull over today, Skrull dies in 3 days. That's not a negotiating position. That's a biological fact. Dorvin knows that if he reads this, which means what he actually wants, what he has always wanted since that ship crashed 6 weeks ago, and what he has available to him, are not the same thing anymore. They are only the same thing if I stay involved." Yaira picked up the report. She read it. She read it again. What Reed had not told the room, had not told anyone yet, was the second part of what he had done in his 30 minutes of borrowed time. He had called the Interstellar Neutral Observer Archive. He had spoken to a night duty archivist for 7 minutes, and he had transmitted, by the colony's secure relay, every scan Nessa had taken of Skrull, every biological record from the bonding event, every communication the fleet had sent, and the full text of the bonding law, to the archive, to 3 independent xenobiology research networks, and to a journalist named Reno Lobby who worked for a news organization based 12 light-years away and who had, 3 years ago, published a deeply inconvenient report on hegemony classified territory disputes. The transmission had gone out 40 minutes ago. If the fleet fired on Verdant Station, the full record would already exist somewhere the hegemony could not touch. That was the point. Not to threaten, not to blackmail, simply to ensure that whatever happened here, the truth of what had happened here would survive it. Reed had not mentioned this to Aldrich. He was going to mention it to him soon. He was waiting for the right moment. He can have everything we have, Reed said. All of it. Reed thought about this honestly. Because it was wet and cold and had just hatched alone in the dark with 4 dead siblings around it. And I've spent 9 years working with animals, and you don't leave something like that alone in the dark. Yaira looked at him. Something moved behind her eyes that was not quite an expression, but was the suggestion of one. You are a xenobiologist, she said. Yes. You study alien fauna. Yes. Did you know, she said, very carefully, what it was when you picked it up? Yes, Reed said. There was a pause. And you picked it up anyway, she said. It was scared, Reed said, and small, and the only surviving thing in that hollow. Another pause, longer this time. Yaira stood up. She walked to the window. She stood with her back to the room for nearly a minute, looking out at the landing pad where her shuttle sat. When she turned back, she looked at Reed directly and said something that none of the human diplomatic guidelines had ever prepared him to hear from a senior Draknari official. I think, she said, you may have done something we cannot undo, and I am not certain that is entirely your fault. Skrull chose this moment to stand up on the conference table, take 2 steps toward Yaira, and produce its small questioning sound. Yaira looked at the hatchling for a long moment. Her face did not change, but she did not look away. It is healthy, she said. Yes, Reed said. Everything it can reach. I've been supplementing with the Bureau's reptile protein rations. It seems to find them acceptable. Yaira's mouth moved in a way that might have been something, on a face that was better at hiding things. She reached into the bag she carried and set something on the table, a small container, sealed, with Draknari markings. Hatchling supplement, she said. The correct nutritional ratio for this developmental stage. The protein rations will do, but these will help the scale hardening. Reed looked at the container, then at Yaira. Thank you, he said. She nodded once. Very small. She picked up her bag. I will speak to the Admiral, she said. I cannot promise you what he will decide, but I will tell him what I have seen here, what I have heard. She paused at the door. Prepare for the possibility that he will want to speak to you directly, not through the governor, not through the Bureau, to you. She left. Aldrich looked at Reed. Reed looked at the container of hatchling supplements on the table, and at Skrull, who had moved over to investigate it with great interest. You broadcast everything, Aldrich said quietly. It was not a question. He had figured it out. Yes, Reed said. A very long pause. About an hour ago, Reed said. Another pause. Outside, Yaira's shuttle was lifting off, heading back to the fleet. You have no idea, Aldrich said slowly, whether that makes this better or worse. No, Reed agreed. But I know the fleet didn't fire when they found out. And that tells me something. What does it tell you? Reed watched the shuttle disappear into the clouds. That Dorvan wants Skrull alive more than he wants this to go the way it's supposed to go, he said. And that's the only room we have to work with. So we work with it. He opened the supplement container. Skrull put its whole head inside and made a deeply satisfied sound. Reed pulled out his tablet and began drafting notes for a conversation he had not been invited to yet, but knew was coming. He had a feeling that when it came, he was going to need every word exactly right. The call came at 3 in the afternoon, when the second moon was crossing the horizon and painting Verdant Station in dull orange light. No flags, no introduction from a communications officer, just a direct channel opening on Reed's terminal with a single text line, Admiral Dorvan. Ready when you are. Reed had been sitting with this moment in his head all day, turning it over, thinking about what he was going to say and in what order and what he was going to do if none of it worked. He had notes on his tablet, 3 pages of them, biological facts, legal angles, logical arguments structured in the order of least threatening to most essential. He put the tablet face down on the desk. He had decided, somewhere in the last hour, that the notes were the wrong approach. You did not out-argue an admiral of a civilization 800 years older than your own colonial posting. You were honest, and you were clear, and you did not pretend to have more than you had, because anything else was going to be visible and was going to make things worse. He accepted the call. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Dorvin looked past Reed's shoulder. At Skrull. Skrull was on the desk behind Reed, investigating a pen holder. It had no idea it was being observed by the highest-ranking member of its biological family currently alive in this sector of space. It knocked the pen holder over, scattered 5 pins across the desk, and began examining them individually with great seriousness. Something happened in Dorvin's face. It was not a smile. It was not relief. It was the expression of someone who had been holding very tightly to a belief about how a situation was going to end, and had just seen evidence that it might end differently, and was not yet willing to trust that evidence. "It is well," Dorvin said. It was not a question. His standard was precise and almost unaccented, which told Reed he had been practicing or had used it often for a very long time. "Yes," Reed said. "It's healthy. Growing fast. It ate twice today." Dorvin's eyes moved back to Reed. "You named it?" "Yes. Skrull. The translation program gave me the closest word I could find." "Small stubborn thing," Dorvin said. "That's the one." A pause. "It is accurate," Dorvin said. Reed did not know what to say to that, so he said nothing. He had learned, in 9 years of field work, that silence was often more useful than any sound. Dorvin seemed to understand silence too. He sat in it for a moment, and then said, "My sister named the clutch before the ship went down. I did not know the names. We were not close in recent years." He paused. "I did not know there was a survivor. I did not find out until the fleet arrived and the bonding skin came back." Reed absorbed this. He thought about the crash site in the jungle. The hollow. For broken shells. One alive. "I'm sorry about your sister," Reed said. Dorvin looked at him. The exhaustion in his face was very clear now, up close. He had probably not slept much since the crash. 6 weeks of not sleeping much would do what Reed was seeing. "You are afraid," Dorvin said. It was matter of fact, not cruel. "Yes," Reed said. "I have been since the fleet appeared. I'm still afraid. I think it would be strange if I wasn't." "Most people in your position would not say that to me," Dorvin said. Another pause. Longer. "You read our law," Dorvin said. "Everything my clearance would reach," Reed said. "And some things it wouldn't, through translation programs that weren't entirely legal." Something in Dorvin's expression shifted slightly. Not approval. Something adjacent to it. "Then you know the reclamation is the required response," Dorvin said. "I know it was the required response in 3 previous cases," Reed said. "I also know those 3 cases all involved bonded outsiders who didn't know what the bond was, didn't know it was happening, and found out when a fleet showed up. I know because Counsel Yaira confirmed it to me this morning." He kept his voice level. "I'm a different case. The law was not written for this case." "The law does not require a different case," Dorvin said. "It requires a bond to an outsider. The law was written to prevent a hatchling from being used as leverage," Reed said. "I haven't done that." "No," Dorvin said slowly. "You have not." "I could," Reed said. "I want to be clear about that. I could have made this much harder. I didn't, and I'm not going to. Not because I'm certain you won't proceed with the reclamation anyway, but because using Skrull as a tool is exactly what made the bonding law necessary in the first place, and I'm not willing to do it." Dorvin was quiet for a long moment. Reed waited. "Why not?" Dorvin said. "You are a single human on a small colony. You have almost no leverage. The logical action would get Skrull killed," Reed said. "Within 3 days of forced separation. Which is not what you want, and not what I want, and is the thing we should probably both be organizing around instead of the other things." Something about the directness seemed to land differently than anything Dorvin had expected. He was quiet again, but a different kind of quiet. Thinking quiet, not evaluating quiet. "Yes. Our own scholars are reviewing it. They dispute the timeline. The timeline is based on what I observed," Reed said. The bond initiated at approximately midnight local time, 11 hours after I found the hatchling. I have the biosign data from my health monitoring band. The device registered the event as a complete stop and restart of my cardiac rhythm. 11 seconds exactly. I can send the raw file. Send it, Dorvin said. Reed sent it without breaking the connection. He heard the soft chime on Dorvin's end when it arrived. Then he said, carefully, "There's something else I should tell you. Since midnight, since the bond, I've been physically different. I have chronic joint damage in my left knee from a field accident 4 years ago. As of this morning, it doesn't hurt. I've had a respiratory condition since I was posted here, the local pollen cycle. It's gone. Whatever Skrull's biology is doing to my system, it isn't just affecting my heartbeat." Dorvin went very still. "Our scholars," he said slowly, "have noted this in bonded cases. It is classified." "I figured," Reed said. "I'm not raising it as leverage. I'm raising it because it's data, and if there's any chance of resolving this without either Skrull dying or the colony being destroyed, we both need to be working from the same data." Dorvin looked at him for a long time. "What is it you want?" he said. "Not the governor. Not your bureau. You." Reed had thought about this for 4 hours. He knew the answer. A long silence. "You are a xenobiologist," Dorvin said. Same tone as Yaira had used. Like the fact kept arriving differently each time he considered it. "Yes. Yes. Not diplomats." "No," Reed said. "Definitely not." Something happened at the corner of Dorvin's mouth that was very small and was gone almost immediately. "There is a legal designation," Dorvin said, "under very old hegemony law, older than the bonding law. It covers non-bloodline individuals who provide primary care to a bonded hatchling in cases where the bloodline parent is unable to do so. The designation exists because, in the early history of our species, hatchlings were sometimes orphaned in ways that required care from outside the family unit." He paused. "It has never been assigned to a non-Draknari. It has also never been legally prohibited." Reed said nothing. He waited. "If you were to request that designation," Dorvin said, "and if I were to support the request, it would create a legal framework for your continued involvement. It would not be comfortable. You would be under hegemony jurisdiction in a number of ways that your colonial government would find objectionable, and you would need to come aboard the flagship for an assessment by our bonding scholars before any designation could be formalized." "Alone?" Reed said. "Yes." Reed thought about this. He thought about it with the same deliberate, systematic focus he brought to every survey decision, every field assessment, every situation where the information was incomplete and the cost of being wrong was high. When he said, "Tomorrow," Dorvin said, "First light. What happens if the scholar's assessment goes against me?" Reed nodded once. "I'll be at the landing pad at first light," he said. He ended the call. He sat in his chair for a moment, alone in the small room, thinking about tomorrow. Skrull climbed off the desk, walked across his lap, turned in 3 circles, and settled on his legs with its tail wrapped around his ankle. It made the low, warm vibration sound. Reed felt his shoulders drop about 2 inches. "You are not helping," he told it. Skrull opened one gold eye, looked at him, and closed it again. Reed picked up his tablet. He started making new notes. Tomorrow he was going to walk aboard an alien warship and talk to scholars who had the authority to end this in a way he would not survive, and the most important thing he could do right now was sleep, which he was not going to be able to do. So he was going to do the second most important thing, which was know as much as possible about what he was walking into. He read until the 3rd moon rose. Skrull slept across his legs the entire time and did not move at all, and Reed found, to his genuine surprise, that this made the reading easier. The quiet helped. He had not expected that either. The shuttle that came for Reed the next morning was small and dark and smelled like metal and something mineral he had no reference for. The 2 Draknari soldiers escorting him were about 8 feet tall and wore full armor and said nothing to him at all for the entire 15-minute ascent. Reed looked out the small viewport. Verdant Station shrank below him. The colony grid, the jungle fringes, the survey paths he had walked 100 times. Somewhere down there in the holding room, Skrull was asleep on a folded emergency blanket. Nessa was watching it. Reed had told Skrull he was leaving before he got on the shuttle, which was a thing that felt necessary even knowing the hatchling could not fully understand him yet. It had understood something. It had grabbed his sleeve with all 6 limbs and refused to let go for 20 minutes. He was thinking about this when the shuttle entered the flagship's landing bay and the doors opened onto a corridor that was designed for creatures twice his size. The 4 soldiers who met him in the bay escorted him through 3 corridors and 2 large doors before they reached the assessment chamber. It was a circular room, wide, high-ceilinged, with a ring of instruments along the walls that Reed could not identify by function and did not try. 3 Draknari were seated at a curved table at the center. They were old in the way Reed could read by now, the pale-edged scales, the deliberate slowness of movement that came from centuries of accumulated caution. They looked at him the way Reed looked at field specimens, with total, impersonal attention. "Reed Calloway," said the one in the center. "Xenobiologist. 9 years service to the Colonial Science Bureau. We have your file." "I assumed you would," Reed said. "Sit." There was one chair on his side of the table. It was a human chair, which told him someone had planned for this. He sat. What followed was the most comprehensive biological assessment Reed had ever experienced. They scanned him 6 different ways with instruments he could not name. They took tissue samples from his hand, 3 small pinpricks, nothing dramatic. They asked him to describe the bonding event in complete detail, which he did, from the moment he crouched in the hollow to the 11 seconds of darkness to the present morning. They listened without interrupting. They took no visible notes, which either meant they had perfect recall or the room was recording everything, and Reed assumed both. Then they asked him questions about Skrull. Not biological questions, behavioral ones. What did Skrull eat? How did it sleep? What did it do when it was frightened? When it was calm? Had it shown any unusual behaviors? Reed answered all of it. Some of the answers were things he had written down, and some were things he had simply noticed. The way Skrull turned its head when it heard something new, the way it always chose to sleep on his left side rather than his right, the way it had aimed the plasma flare precisely at the coffee mug and nowhere else, which was not random and was not accident and suggested a level of fine motor control in a hatchling this young that he had not seen documented anywhere. The scholars looked at each other when he said this. "You noted that specifically," the center scholar said. "I note everything specifically," Reed said. "It's what I do." "You are not afraid of it," the scholar on the left said. "I'm appropriately cautious of it," Reed said. "That's different." The scholar on the right made a sound that Reed could not translate. Then the center scholar set a document on the table. "Your cellular readings," he said. "I will tell you what we have found, because you have been honest with us, and because what we have found has implications that go beyond this assessment." "What does it mean?" Reed asked. "The healing you described," the scholar said. "The knee. The respiratory condition. These are consistent with this level of integration. The restructuring is not harmful. In fact," he paused again and looked at his colleagues, and then back at Reed. "What I am about to tell you has not been shared outside the hegemony's bonding research division. It is classified at a level above Admiral Dorvan's own standing clearance." Reed said nothing. He waited. "Draknari who are bonded live longer," the scholar said. "Measurably. Significantly. The biological mechanism is not fully understood, but the immune integration that occurs during bonding appears to extend the natural lifespan of the bonded individual. In our species, bonded pairs live on average 40 to 60 years longer than in bonded individuals." He met Reed's eyes. "We have never had data from a bonded outsider. We have never had a bonded outsider survive long enough to study. But your scans suggest the mechanism is active in your cells. What this means for a human lifespan, we cannot say with certainty, but we believe it means something significant." Reed sat with this information for a moment. He had a specific kind of face that he made when receiving data that was too large to process all at once. Nessa had described it once as looking like a man who had just opened a door he expected to lead to a closet and found a mountain range behind it. He was probably making that face now. "I'd like a copy of those scans," he said. "You will have them," the scholar said. What the scholars did not know, what no one on the flagship knew, was what was happening on Verdant Station at that exact moment. Skrull had been calm for 6 hours. It had eaten, slept, walked in circles, and made its low questioning sound periodically while Nessa watched it from a careful distance. Then, at some point between the 3rd and 4th hour of Reed's absence, it stopped being calm. The door was a standard colonial security door. 3 centimeters of reinforced material, magnetic lock, weight sensor alarm. Scrawl put one set of front limbs against the door, thought about this for a moment, and then methodically began dismantling the lock mechanism from the outside edge, using its front limbs in a pattern that suggested it had never done this before, but had looked at the door long enough to understand the principle. It took 11 minutes. The door beyond that was a simpler door. That one took 4 minutes. Then Scrawl walked through 3 more corridors, ignoring everyone who tried to stop it, not with aggression, but with the specific energy of something that had decided where it was going and found obstacles only mildly interesting, and arrived in the main landing bay. It sat down in the center of the bay floor, faced the direction of the flagship in orbit, and made a sound. The colony's audio equipment later recorded the peak at 140 decibels. The wildlife in a 12-kilometer radius went completely silent. 2 of the colony's external sensors briefly interpreted the frequency as a seismic event. Inside the flagship, one of the assessment room's walls displayed a real-time feed from the colony's landing bay. The scholars had added it when Scrawl's departure from the holding room was reported. Reed and all 3 scholars watched Scrawl sitting in the landing bay, alone, making its sound, its gold eyes fixed on the sky. Reed felt it, faintly, through the bond. Not sound. Pressure. A pull, like a tide. It knows you are up here, the center scholar said quietly. Yes, Reed said. Yes. The scholar was quiet for a moment. Then, it has never been studied in an active bond at this age. The call behavior typically develops in the 3rd or 4th month. This is day 5. He understood that feeling in a way that surprised him. He had spent 9 years in places that were too large and too strange, cataloging things that no one else had bothered to look at, writing reports that no one fully read, being reliable in the specific, quiet way of someone who had learned not to need too much from the world around them. He had thought he was fine with that. He was not entirely sure he was fine with that anymore. The scholars deliberated for 40 minutes. Reed waited in a side room with one of the soldiers and a cup of water that tasted slightly wrong and a view of the flagship's interior bay, which was enormous and full of ships that could individually destroy Verdant Station and were currently doing nothing at all. The center scholar came to him when it was done. The bond is genuine, he said. Deep, stable, and without precedent in our records. By every biological measure this institution uses, you are this hatchling's bonded caregiver. He paused. We have no framework by which to deny it. We have said so formally, and the record has been entered. Reed breathed out. The designation request, the scholar said. It will take 2 hours of paperwork. The Admiral has agreed to process it personally. 2 hours of paperwork. The most significant diplomatic event in this sector in 40 years, and it required 2 hours of paperwork. Reed found this enormously comforting in a way he could not entirely explain. He spent part of the 2 hours answering more questions from the scholars, who had become significantly less formal since the assessment ended and appeared to have a great many questions about Draknari hatchling development as seen from the outside, which Reed could speak to at a level of detail that visibly surprised them. The scholar looked at him steadily. Why did you prepare? You did not know this assessment was coming. Reed thought about this honestly. I didn't know the assessment was coming, he said, but I knew something was coming. And whenever something is coming that I can't control, the only thing that helps is knowing as much as possible about it first. It doesn't fix the problem. It just means I'm not surprised by the shape of it. The scholar said nothing for a moment. Then, that is a Draknari approach to uncertainty. Is it? Reed said. We call it arming the mind, the scholar said. Preparing knowledge as a tool for unknown conflict. We just call it reading, Reed said. The documentation was processed. The designation was signed by Dorvin personally, without ceremony, in a way that told Reed Dorvin had decided on this before the assessment began and had needed the scholar's formal record to make it legal. He grabbed a support strut with one hand to steady himself. Scrawl pressed against his chest and made it sound, and Reed stood in the middle of the bay, holding a baby dragon that weighed nearly 40 kilograms, and felt the pull of the tide go quiet. Nessa stood 20 meters away, watching. It destroyed 2 doors, she said. I know, Reed said. And scared the wildlife out of 12 kilometers. I saw. Are you all right? She said. Reed thought about everything he had learned in the last 8 hours. The cellular restructuring, the extended lifespan, the scholar's assessment. The paperwork that made him officially and legally something no human had ever been before. I think so, he said. I'll know more once I've slept. His terminal chimed. A private channel, opening from the flagship. Dorvin's identifier. He opened it one-handed, with scrawl still wrapped around his chest. The scholars want to publish their findings about the integration, Dorvin said. No preamble. I told them no. Reed waited. I told them not yet, Dorvin said. You will need time to decide what you want the galaxy to know. Why are you giving me that choice? Reed said. 6 months after the Draknari fleet left Verdant Station, a research paper was published in the Interstellar Neutral Observer Archive. It was 14 pages long. It had 2 authors, a xenobiologist from the Colonial Science Bureau and a Draknari bonding scholar whose name took up half the cover page. It was titled Observations on Cross-Species Biological Integration Following an Unplanned Draknari Hatchling Bonding Event, and it had the driest, most factual title that either author could produce, because both of them knew that the content was extraordinary enough without making the title dramatic. Reed was not on Verdant Station when any of this happened. He lived now in a Draknari research station called Vethera Post, at the boundary of hegemony space and the neutral corridor. It was neither colony nor hegemony territory in any clean administrative sense, which suited everyone involved. The post was a modest facility, 12 research rooms, a small common area, a landing pad, and an observation deck that looked out at a sky full of unfamiliar stars. The Draknari staff there were researchers, not soldiers, and they had spent the first 2 weeks treating Reed with extreme caution and the next 2 weeks treating him with extreme curiosity. And somewhere in the 5th week a researcher named Holt, who Reed privately found deeply funny to think about, given his own colleague's name, had started dropping by during his note sessions to look at Skrull's development data and ask questions. And after that it had felt more like a place Reed lived than a place Reed was kept. He missed Verdant Station sometimes. The wet copper smell of the jungle. The green moonlight. His small room with the window that looked at a wall. He did not miss it enough to go back, which told him something. Skrull was now the size of a small vehicle. This was not the right way to measure a Draknari's growth, as the post scholars had explained to Reed extensively, but it was the fastest comparison he had for what had happened between month 1 and month 6. The soft scales had hardened into true armor, dark, iridescent, angled in the way that let them shed heat or retain it depending on which way Skrull oriented itself to the light. The 6 limbs had lengthened and the wings had expanded to roughly 3 meters folded and nearly double that when Skrull chose to extend them, which it did periodically in the research station's open courtyard for reasons that seemed to be primarily about enjoyment. The vocabulary was now somewhere north of 300 words, in a mixture of Draknari and Reed's colony dialect, and growing rapidly. The syntax was still loose, but the intent was always clear. Skrull spoke the way a very intelligent being speaks when it is learning 2 languages at once, efficiently, with heavy emphasis on the words that mattered and no patience at all for the ones that didn't. The first full sentence Skrull had produced, 14 weeks in, was directed at one of the post's researchers who had left a data pad in the middle of the courtyard, which Skrull considered its space. The sentence was, "Move this. It is in the wrong place." The researcher had moved it. Skrull had watched to make sure. Then it had gone back to what it was doing, apparently satisfied. Reed had recorded this in his field notes with barely disguised pride. Nessa arrived on a Thursday. She stepped off the shuttle with 2 cases and the expression of a person who had spent 12 hours in transit and was not going to complain about it, but wanted it noted. Reed met her at the landing pad. "You look different," she said, looking at him. "I feel different," he said. She handed him a case and looked at him more carefully, the way she looked at data she was trying to place. "You're healthier," she said. "Significantly." "The mitochondrial restructuring," he said. "The scholars here have been tracking it. The integration is still active. Apparently, it will be for the first 2 years and then stabilize." "What does stable mean for a human with ongoing Draknari biological integration?" she said. Nessa looked at him for another moment. "How do you feel about that?" Reed considered this honestly. "I feel like it's interesting," he said. "Which is probably the answer that worries you most." She laughed. It was genuine. She had brought 2 things Reed had actually asked for: a full archive of the colonial survey data from his last 18 months on Verdant Station and a formal citation document in a sealed envelope from the Colonial Science Bureau. The citation was the highest civilian honor the colonies gave. Reed read it once, alone, in his research room. The language was careful and official and said, essentially, that he had demonstrated remarkable interspecies diplomacy under conditions not covered by any existing protocol, which Reed thought was a generous way to describe accidentally bonding a Draknari hatchling and then spending 4 days reading alien law in a conference room. He framed it. He hung it next to a drawing Skrull had made 9 weeks ago using its tail and some kind of reddish material it had found in the courtyard that Reed had never been able to identify. The drawing was abstract in structure, but clearly representational in intent. There was a large shape. Reed's best guess was that this was Skrull, and a small shape, and the small shape appeared to be sitting in the large shape space in a comfortable way. It might have been a portrait. Reed had decided it was. The 3 species inquiries were the thing that kept Reed busy in the evenings when the research work was done. 3 different non-Draknari, non-human species had quietly contacted the Colonial Bureau in the months after the paper was published. All 3 had hatchling bonding situations they had classified and suppressed for their own historical reasons. All 3 had read the Verdant Station record and had contacted the Bureau not to make demands, but to ask questions. Careful, tentative questions from civilizations that had been keeping very large secrets for a very long time and were not sure yet whether they were ready to stop keeping them. Reed had started corresponding with all 3. Not officially, not as a representative of the Colonial Bureau or the hegemony's legal framework. Just as himself, a xenobiologist who had been through something and had some observations that might be useful. Council Yaira had called this, in a message to Reed that arrived the same week as Nessa, the most consequential unofficial diplomatic correspondence in this sector in 2 centuries. She had then said, "Please be careful." And then, "You probably know what you're doing. Be careful anyway." He had written back, "I always know what I'm doing." And then, "I'll be careful." Dorvin came once. He did not announce it. There was no message, no shuttle request. Nessa noticed first, on the landing pad monitor, a small hegemony transport, military markings, setting down just after sunset. She came and found Reed in the research room and told him, and Reed went to the window and watched. Dorvin came out of the transport alone. He walked to the edge of the courtyard, which was visible from the landing pad, and stood there. Skrull was in the courtyard, in its evening routine, moving slowly around the perimeter, which it did before settling for the night, for reasons the scholars believed were territorial and Reed believed were just habitual. It stopped when it registered the presence at the edge of the courtyard. It looked at Dorvin. Dorvin looked at Skrull. Neither of them moved for a long time. Reed watched from the window and did not go outside. He did not think he was supposed to be there for this moment. Then Skrull crossed the courtyard, not fast, not slow, with the particular measured pace it used when approaching something it was uncertain about, but had decided to approach anyway, and sat down in front of Dorvin, right in front of him, looking up at him the way it looked at everything, with total, open attention and the question in its gold eyes. Dorvin looked down at it for a very long time. Reed did not see Dorvin's face from where he stood. He saw the way Dorvin's shoulders changed, the specific way that tension leaves a person when they stop holding something they have been holding for a very long time. There was no expression on Dorvin's face that Reed had a clean word for. It was the face of someone on the other side of a very long journey, looking at the person who had, without meaning to, changed the direction of it. He nodded once. Reed nodded once. Dorvin walked to his transport and left. Yaira told Reed afterward that it was the first time Dorvin had seen Skrull since the crash, and that Dorvin had said nothing about the visit to anyone on record. That was 4 weeks before Nessa's visit. Reed had thought about it every day since. On the night of Nessa's 3rd day at the post, after they had gone through the survey archive and eaten a late dinner and Nessa had gone to bed, Reed went up to the observation deck alone. The sky out here was different from Verdant Station's sky. No green moon, no copper smell, no familiar jungle noise. Just stars, clean and cold, and very many of them, and the occasional running light of a hegemony patrol passing at distance. He sat in the one chair on the observation deck and opened his tablet and started writing. It was a field note. Same format as every field note in 9 years of work. Date, location, subject, observations, Conclusions. He had been doing it since the beginning. It was the only record-keeping habit he had that he trusted completely, and he trusted it because it forced him to be precise and honest, and to separate what he had seen from what he thought about what he had seen. Subject: cross-species bonding biology and caregiver viability. Observations, months 1 through 6. He wrote for an hour. He wrote about Skrull's development in terms he had not used in the paper, not the careful scientific language of publication, but the plain, specific language of someone who had been present for all of it and was trying to record it accurately. The way Skrull had looked at him in the hollow. The 11 seconds of darkness at midnight. The way Dorvan's shoulders had changed in the courtyard. He wrote the conclusion last. What changes this is being in the room with it and not running. Skrull followed me home because I was warm and quiet, and I did not move away. I did not do anything remarkable. I did what anyone does with something small and new and scared, which is, I stayed. The galaxy has apparently been afraid of exactly this kind of thing for a very long time. I do not think it expected a xenobiologist from Verdant Station to be the one who stayed long enough to make it less frightening. I would not have expected it either. He filed the note into the Neutral Observer archive, where it would sit alongside everything else he had put there, in the record that now existed in a place the hegemony could not reach and the colonies could not suppress, and the 3 quietly corresponding species across the sector could read if they chose to. He put the tablet down. Skrull had come up the stairs to the observation deck at some point in the last hour, which it did sometimes, moving with a quietness that was impressive for something its size. It settled beside the chair. It was too large now to settle on Reed's lap, which it appeared to find genuinely inconvenient, and leaned its enormous head against Reed's shoulder with a weight that pushed him sideways about 3 centimeters in his chair. He leaned back. The stars out here were unfamiliar. He had spent 9 years learning the stars above Verdant Station, and he would have to start over with these ones, which was fine. He had notes. He had time. He had, according to the scholars, significantly more time than he had expected to have. He realized slowly, exactly where he was supposed to be. He had gotten a wet, shivering baby dragon instead, and he had taken it home, and it had turned out to be the same thing.